9 days before Trump's next round of 50% tariffs was set to hit, Canada's own chief trade negotiator walked into a room in Washington and delivered a warning nobody expected her to say out loud. Janice Charette told United States Trade Representative Jamieson Greer directly, "If these tariffs actually go into effect on August 19th, that's not just another escalation, that's a cliff, and it could halt these negotiations entirely." Meanwhile, on one specific demand sitting at the center of this entire deal, provincial premiers across Ontario, Quebec, and British Columbia have made something crystal clear to Ottawa: they will decide when American alcohol goes back on Canadian shelves, not Washington. And definitely not in exchange for nothing more than a promise to keep talking. This is what real Canadian resistance looks like right now. Not a single dramatic no, but a country carefully choosing exactly where to hold the line. Here's what we're covering. First, we'll break down what's actually on the table in these negotiations because Canada has already given up more than people realize on several fronts. Then we'll get into the one demand premiers are refusing to budge on, the alcohol ban, and why they're tying it directly to a completely different set of tariffs. After that, we'll cover Charette's cliff warning to Washington, straight from a closed-door meeting last week. We'll look at what Canada has already sacrificed just to keep talks alive, because that context matters enormously for understanding why this particular refusal carries so much weight. And finally, we'll talk about what happens to American consumers and businesses if the August 19th deadline actually arrives without a deal. Let's start with where things actually stand. According to Globe and Mail and Reuters reporting from this past week, Canada and the United States are deep in intensive negotiations, trading detailed written proposals back and forth, with Canadian trade officials essentially camped out in Washington trying to land a deal before the deadline. The framework taking shape would see the U.S. lower, though not fully eliminate, its Section 232 tariffs on Canadian steel, aluminum, autos, and forest products, and refrain from hitting additional products with new tariffs on August 19th. In exchange, Canada would eliminate its own retaliatory tariffs on American goods. Prime Minister Mark Carney has been explicit that he wants a comprehensive deal, not a partial one, but the exact contours are still being negotiated, and as of this writing, nothing has been finalized. Now here's the specific demand that's become the real sticking point. One of Trump's top asks is for the alcohol ban, the one most Canadian provinces imposed on American beer, wine, and spirits, to be lifted entirely. And provincial premiers, particularly in Ontario, Quebec, and British Columbia, have made their position unmistakably clear. They will be the ones deciding when that happens. Not the federal government negotiating on their behalf, and they've explicitly tied any reversal to real, meaningful progress on the Section 232 tariffs first. One provincial government source told the Globe and Mail plainly that American alcohol would only return to Canadian shelves if there is significant and meaningful progress on the steel, aluminum, auto, and lumber tariffs, and that there is no way premiers will fold on the alcohol ban simply in exchange for more talks. Remember, this is the exact boycott that the White House's own fact sheet already confirmed cost American producers over $580 million in lost sales. Premiers aren't giving that leverage back for free, and they're saying so on the record. That refusal matters even more once you see everything Canada has already conceded just to keep these talks alive in the first place. Carney's government canceled its planned digital services tax specifically at Trump's request. It rolled back a requirement forcing streaming companies to fund Canadian content creators. It agreed to share toll revenue from the Gordie Howe International Bridge with the United States for 15 years, even though Canada paid the entire $6.4 billion cost of building that bridge itself, again, at Trump's behest, after his administration blocked the bridge's opening at the last moment over what it called unfair trade practices. This is a government that has clearly demonstrated it's willing to give ground on real, substantive issues to keep the relationship functional, which makes the Premier's unified refusal on alcohol specifically stand out even more. This isn't blanket obstruction. It's a deliberate, calculated decision about exactly which card is worth holding on to. And the pressure isn't only coming from the Canadian side either. Last week, Charette delivered her cliff warning directly to Greer in a closed-door meeting, cautioning American officials about the public mood inside Canada and making clear that new tariffs landing on August 19th wouldn't just be another round of economic pain, it would risk shutting down the negotiating table entirely. 5 separate sources briefed on the discussions confirmed the substance of that warning. Ontario's own finance minister, Peter Bethlenfalvy, put the province's expectations plainly, saying Canada needs a deal that genuinely accounts for its steel industry, its manufacturers, its auto sector, and its lumber and derivative products. A fair, hard-driven, negotiated deal, not a rushed settlement that leaves Canadian industry exposed just to make a headline deadline. There's also a real trust problem sitting underneath all of this, and it's worth naming directly. One Canadian source close to the talks noted that it doesn't appear President Trump is being kept fully informed of every development at the negotiating table, raising the genuine possibility that he could personally scupper an agreement his own officials had already worked out, or tack on additional demands at the last minute. That's precisely what happened last October, when Trump walked away from talks entirely over an Ontario government anti-tariff advertisement, a dispute serious enough to freeze negotiations for months before they resumed this spring with little real progress. To be fair, none of this means Canada is refusing to negotiate in good faith, quite the opposite. Ottawa has made real, substantive concessions on the digital tax, streaming content rules, and bridge revenue, each one a genuine sacrifice of Canadian policy or revenue specifically to keep this relationship moving forward. The alcohol ban standoff isn't stubbornness for its own sake. Premiers have been explicit and consistent that they'll reconsider it the moment there's real progress on the tariffs actually hurting Canadian steelworkers, auto workers, and lumber producers. That's not obstruction. That's basic negotiating leverage, applied narrowly and deliberately rather than scattered across every possible issue. So what happens if August 19th arrives without a deal? Nearly $20 billion in Canadian exports, covering products from milk to plywood to hockey sticks to beer, would face an additional 50% tariff on top of whatever duties already apply. American consumers and businesses would be the ones absorbing that cost directly. Higher prices on everyday goods, more expensive construction materials, and continued disruption for manufacturers on both sides of a border that used to move goods with minimal friction. Charette's warning wasn't just diplomatic posturing. It was Canada telling Washington plainly that pushing forward on that deadline doesn't just hurt Canada, it risks collapsing the entire framework. Both sides have spent months building. So that's the full picture, a negotiation where Canada has already given up real, tangible things to keep talks alive, while holding firm on exactly one demand it's decided is worth the fight, and warning Washington in blunt terms that crossing the August 19th line could blow the whole deal apart. If you found this breakdown useful, hit like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments, do you think Canada holds this line on alcohol all the way to the deadline, or do the premiers eventually fold under pressure?